Thus city caretaker observes glumly as dirt is shoveled on top of the condemned sergeant for all time. The gathering, still bewildered, still in shock, still in melancholy, departs slowly. On the cemetery's opposite side, another fresh grave has already been filled, another burial ceremony concluded. The gathering there was much smaller, still just as bewildered but somewhat less melancholic. A small number of merchants, tradesmen, and a smattering of townspeople who barely knew the deceased, came to pay their respects. The quiet, reserved merchant traveler from a faraway land has only recently begun to establish his homestead in Grimsby, when the veteran's errant nightmarish shot ended it all. The deed is done, the gravediggers return to other duties demanded of them by the dead. Just as the diggers depart, the proctor and captain steps in. The dead are laid to rest. Now the living attend to their affairs. By order of the High Proctor of Grimsby, the chief city caretaker, Master Reginald Wentworth, is to conclude the affairs of former Sergeant, retired, Alan Daly and Mr. Thaddeus Fane. The proctor hands his orders to the caretaker, who reluctantly accepts. The proctor and captain swiftly departs. There are issues elsewhere in this city that needs addressing. There's always an issue that needs addressing in Grimsby. In happier times, the caretaker is responsible for managing the city's many affairs, such as partitioning of the various commercial, agricultural, industrial, governmental, military and residential districts, granting business licenses and guild charters, authorizing buying and selling land and property, overseeing construction, and more light-hearted duties such as planning holiday celebrations, approval of parade routes and festival grounds. In times that are less so, he is responsible for cataloging and reporting violations of the law in construction and commerce, dissolving charters and licenses, issuing notices of eviction and finalizing such, and, his current duty, resolve the affairs of the deceased who have no living relations, or have left behind no will and testament. Evictions are the only duty he abhors more than his current task. Completely alone, except for his thoughts, the chief caretaker surveys the garden of stones, crypts, and statues. He is currently on the military side. This is where those who pledged their lives to the service of Grimsby lie in wait for the Maker's return. Some had the luxury of sleep after their service was long concluded. Many more, however, had sacrificed it all in Grimsby's defense. Much too old to have been involved in the struggle for Grimsbyan independence, the caretaker still understands the vagaries of war all too intimately. His father was a loving and kind man, before and after his Malachian conscription was over. Despite that, he returned a changed man. Slightly quicker to anger, much more paranoid and fearful. Much, much nicer to all the children, not only his own. More prone to flights of fancy and fits of wanderlust. And the nightmares. The family almost went bankrupt when the time came for young Reggie Wentworth's conscription. All that bribery and forgery, one shudders to think what would have happened if the caretaker had another brother in addition to him and his two sisters. When the father's time drew near, the family was gathered together closely as he wept his tale of woe. Severe punishments for minor infractions. Long, hard back-breaking labor. Being fed barely enough to function. This was all in peacetime. Then Malachi declared war. An entire town put to the torch. Those who resist were tortured and butchered. Wanton destruction of property, pillaging of the populace's wealth, and the ravaging of women, those were the orders of the day. None were spared. Even the children. Especially the children. All because a duke wanted seaside property. When Grimsby declared independence, The elderly caretaker was far, far away from the conflict, but not from its effects. Under the Malachian Claw, he was the royal adjudicator of the Lycia Fields Governorate. Under the Grimsbyan Fist, he is chief city caretaker for the newly re-established capital of Grimsby. Despite the different flags, his duties remained the same, especially his duties to the dead. And there were many dead in Grimsby's fight. All that bloodshed, all those orphans and widows, entire bloodlines and families wiped out. The folly of it all. He shook his head as he departed the groves of the dead and headed into the land of the living. The path to his destination took him aside the Wilgrew Manor. The volunteers have just finished their weekly cleaning and are about to leave the premises. The caretaker greeted them cordially. They proudly displayed their handiwork. Once again they did an admirable job. The manor looked as clean and tidy as the day it laid empty. One day he will have to enter that estate, empty it of its abandoned records and paperwork, donate the personal artifacts left behind, and finally approve it for sale. For now, the townspeople and he will continue the elaborate lie that the Wilgrews will return. He has arrived. 856 Grovesmere and 859 Grovesmere, the domiciles of one Alan Daly and one Thaddeus Fane. He decided to attend to the condemned first. I, Alan Daly, the condemned, request to be buried in my full uniform. Any other uniforms, weapons, and equipment acquired during my service or personally will be returned to the military corps for the defense of Grimsby. All of my belongings that may be of use to others, I bequeath to the poor, the needy, and the orphans of Grimsby. The soldiers have already finished their work reclaiming what was bequeathed to the corps. They did fine thorough work in methodically going through all of the veterans' possessions and sorting out civilian trifles from military necessities. It was remarkable how his remaining belongings were so neatly and carefully dispersed around the house. Seeing this, he briefly reminisced of his father's confession about his ordeal as a Malachian regular, how his everyday life must be orderly, regimented, and clean. Or else, one can only hope the penalty for disobedience in the corps is much, much less severe. In the dusty office, the detritus of what was formerly a man laid bare. Boxes of stationery, notepads and notebooks, various documents military and otherwise, newsletters and pamphlets, and letters and correspondences, are all neatly arranged upon the less dusty desk. The caretaker took the piles of paperwork to the not dusty dinner table and began perusing them. First, the documents. Certificates, leases, proof of ownership, licenses, pay stubs, discharge papers, all of them now useless. Amongst is a rough sketch of 4 men, all soldiers. 2 regular infantrymen, one of whom very much resembling Daly, 1 crossbowman, or more appropriately, crossbow child, and 1 man with a precision rifle. Second, the news. The crumpled Malachian fish wrap accused all and sundry of treason and sedition. One accusation of note was levied against the matriarch of Daily Baked Goods store. There are many pamphlets proclaiming independence and extolling resistance. Then a very rare gem, one of the very first copies of the Grimsby Liberator, declaring triumphantly that Grimsby is now free from Malachian tyranny, unaware of the catastrophic conflict that was to come. The museum would have use of these artifacts, the caretaker thought as he placed them all in his deerskin satchel. Third, the letters. The older ones dated back to when the young veteran was a mere boy. They were family correspondences from all over what was once united Malachia. Postcards from grandparents. An uncle who was a farmer out in the countryside showing drawings of bountiful crops. Cousins living in the capital talking about daily life. Then suddenly, the correspondence stopped. The caretaker didn't need to ponder long as to why the correspondences stopped. Then, many years later, coinciding with the end of the war, they started again. Puzzled, the caretaker took a closer look at the newer batches. Every single one of them was signed and sealed, but never delivered. Of course there were no replies. The names on them, the caretaker recognized all too well as casualties of either Malachian oppression or its war with Grimsby. The veteran was writing correspondences to the dead. Many to his family members. Others to childhood friends. Many more still to his former comrade in arms. But one set of letters in particular might yet still have a living recipient. A set of letters are addressed to a young maid in nearby Allerton. It started in boyhood, probably a tourist family, that visited the family bakery. In the tradition of puppy love, the boy wrote about boy things, and the girl wrote about girl things, pledging to meet each other again, and get married someday. The caretaker grew misty-eyed as he fondly remembers his own dearly departed lady. All throughout the war the sergeant continued to write to her. Then when it was all over he stopped. Not writing, of course, there was a stack of letters to prove it. They were just never delivered. Maybe it was survivor's guilt. Maybe he felt unworthy. Maybe he was terrified his nightmares would end up harming her. For whatever reasons, he simply wrote without ever mailing them. All the caretaker could do now is to deliver all these unsent letters to the postmaster. Hopefully there will be some living relatives or friends who will gladly accept these letters on behalf of the departed. Hopefully, the young lady will find comfort in the letters that she should have received a long time ago. Along with all these correspondences, of course, will be one set personally written by the caretaker himself. To whom it may concern, it is my regretful duty that I, Master Reginald Wentworth, Chief City Caretaker of Grimsby, have to inform you that Sergeant Alan Daly, retired, is now deceased. Most of the books and notebooks are still useful, save for one ancient tome chock full with childhood illustrations done in different handwritings. The caretaker lingered for quite a while on a rough scribble of a rowdy group of boys all standing together in front of a gargantuan Michaelmas tree. He recognized most of the names scribbled below each of the crudely drawn figures, particularly the two named Adam and Alan, who are now resting side by side. Not much more to the house now. Some landscapes and portraits would serve as good decoration for the city or for anyone who fancies owning such. But the drawings and paintings of the daily bakery, the uncle's farmstead, the family. With great effort, he gingerly placed the useless papers, the personal portraits and landscapes, the drawing book, the sketch of the 4 soldiers, and anything else that will forever remain unclaimed by the no longer existent daily family into the fireplace. He took one last look, and then put everything to the torch. All these memories, gone to ash. Daly once had a future in front of him, a family with a profitable business, many childhood compatriots, a loving girlfriend and possible future wife. Now he leaves absolutely nothing behind. The folly of it all. The almshouse and orphanages will be here soon. The remnant clothes, cookery, food, and furniture will prove useful to those in need. The caretaker heads toward the merchant's house next. Mr. Fane left behind no will and testament. He was unable to. As quickly as his old bones can manage, the caretaker rushed into Mr. Fane's study. Most of the paperwork arrayed concerns the coming and going of the merchant's numerous and varied transactions. From the tropical paradise of Lays to the snowy tundras of Coptis, this man has been across virtually the entirety of this blessed world. Such a misfortune for it all to end this way in Grimsby. No personal correspondences, all business. No family illustrations, only exotic fine arts and pottery. As far as Mr. Fane is concerned, he sprang out of the earth with no friends and relations, and went straight into business. The caretaker felt a mite sad, but he's not one to judge. He will have to alert the charitable houses as soon as he is finished inspecting the premises. With no next of kin and no will, Mr. Fane's property now belongs to Grimsby. As he headed towards the bedroom, he almost tripped on a very slight protrusion in the floor. A false floor? Probably where the valuables are kept. And he was correct. Important contracts, envelope filled with bills, copious jewelry, and a lovely coin collection. A numismatist with a prolific haul. Shame. Mr. Fane and that Cooter Ledgeworth would have had a lot to talk about at Muir. He removed the contents out of the hidden compartment and placed it on a nearby cabinet to study it later. For now, he has an entire house to examine. Clothes for donation, food for the poor, crockery for Grimsby's schools, jewelry and money for Grimsby's coffers, rare art for museums, documents to destroy. It is done. As he set about to put the torch to the assorted paperwork that will no longer serve anyone, he recoiled in shock at a particular contract and its particular seal. Of course the merchant had business in Malakia. Despite its well-earned reputation, wealthy nobles and abundant resources make it a tempting target for anyone seeking to ply the commercial trades. But the seal upon it is black. Red candle wax is not only the symbol of Malakian heraldry, it is used for all official Malakian documents. Unless it involves trade. Then the golden-colored candle wax is used to seal these agreements. Black is for the militant Royal Malakian war host and its more covert counterpart, the Society of Ravens. As he finished the thought in his mind, a raven approached him from behind, restrained him, and jabbed a needle to his neck. The startled caretaker lets go of his torch, burning all evidence of Malakian treachery. The raven smiles, then taunts. How fortunate! That fat consul took forever to keel over. I was worried that there may not be enough time to remove our traces, yet here I am at just the right moment. The assassin looked at the burning embers of what was once a pile of business papers and one royal ordinance. The taunting resumes. It seems the Maker favors Malachian's success. Too bad for you and Grimsby. The raven then stabs the needle and injects. The toxin courses through the elderly man's veins and arteries. Soon his heart will cease. Perhaps in jest and mockery, but maybe in actual compassion, the raven arranges a chair in front of the fireplace and eases the now dying man into it. He pats the caretaker's shoulders and leaves, out of sight of the population of Grimsby. What was it that the chief caretaker felt in his final moments? Fear? Anger? Hate? No. It was pity. Pity that this young man, probably not much older than many of those who died in the war, had to perform such dark and heinous deeds. Pity that all that bloodshed between Malachian and Grimsby still continues to this day, and will probably resume in some unfortunate future. Pity that this endless war has finally come to claim him as one of its victims. Pity at the folly of it all.